Have you ever finished a watercolor painting and felt like the pieces did not quite fit together? The same thing has happened to me. Sometimes when I would paint my subject matter and then the background, almost like an afterthought, it kind of worked, but sometimes something seemed a little off. What I've learned and started applying in my own work is that cohesion doesn't happen at the end of the painting, but it happens while everything is still messy. Let me show you what I mean. In this painting, I'm going to share with you how I created a background that's cohesive with these leaves, as well as how I could have even taken these concepts further. It comes down to three basic ideas: color cohesion, an earlier start on the background, and a concept I'm going to call weaving, where we move back and forth between elements of the painting and the background, instead of finishing one area at a time. It's really just one simple shift. Stop painting in parts. When I started painting this apple blossom, I start by working wet on wet and dropping in this blue shadow color. In some places you can see it's really soft, and then in other places I go a little bit heavier where I want slightly darker shadows. Sometimes I'll add that second color on top, but in this case I'm actually adding my pinks and blending them directly into my shadows. Sometimes I join my petal shapes together in the first layer, and then other times you can see I'm painting them separately so that you can tell these petals are actually separated from each other. I'm doing the same thing with these little buds. I'm coming in with my shadow color first, and I'm using my reference photo as a guide as to where I want to place my shadows. You can see how I'm blending a little bit of the color right in my painting, and it's helping me create color harmony at this stage. And then in this case, I'm allowing that shadow color to come right outside of my flower bud and into some of these smaller parts of the background. Once I came into these little buds that are somewhat in the background, I added the shadow color, and then I decided this is a perfect time to start bringing this color into the background and the background into the flower petals. So you can see I end up working a little bit back and forth with my water and my blue shadow color. Sometimes you can see I bring that shadow color that I'm applying in the background right on top of my flower buds, whereas when I'm working around some of these petals, I want to maintain the detail and the contrast that I already have there, and so I'm just going to paint around them. Sometimes I'm ending up with soft edges, and other times I have nice crisp lines. And so this is where you can see I start to paint the background early. Once that initial background wash is dry, then I'm coming in and I'm refining my flower buds a little bit, adding layers of soft quinacridone rose, or sometimes using it more concentrated when I want some rich, beautiful red colors. And in some cases, I'm dipping into this slightly richer dark pink, using the exact same pigments I've been using from the beginning. Even though this painting ends up quite colorful, it's not about having a perfect color palette or endless colors. It's making sure that you repeat those same colors again and again throughout the painting, and this creates a sense of color harmony and cohesion so that nothing feels disconnected. You can see how much cohesion I've already achieved, even though we haven't even started our greens. Finally, the part you're waiting for. I'm starting to paint my background wet on wet before I've even placed a single leaf. I really like how this Simply Simmons brush allows me to pull and push my paint around, and you'll notice I haven't painted my background to the very edge of my paper. Today I want to just create sort of a partial background, but you could definitely choose to pull your background to the very edge of your painting. And I'm trying to keep things from getting too dark at this stage because I know I want to be able to lay my leaves on top, and I want the option of some of those leaves remaining lighter. Most of the time I'm painting the background around the flowers, and I'm not having that green cross into the blossoms or buds. You can see I've allowed a little crossover in this upper right corner, but for the most part I was happy with the way my buds and blossoms were already looking, and so I didn't really bring too much green into them. But sometimes a really light glaze of green could work. Or another option is to even add a little pink into your background. I didn't really do that in this painting, but that's definitely something that you could explore. Now, once my background is finished and has thoroughly dried, I'm going to come in and start laying those leaves on top. I'm working pretty loose at first and just blocking these shapes in with some wet on wet techniques. But in a minute, you're going to see how I start bringing in the detail. I do have more than one green mixture on the go. However, I like mixing my greens with Hansa Yellow Deep, Phthalo Blue, and a tiny touch of quinacridone rose. And because I do this pretty consistently, I already have harmony between my greens and they tend to work together quite well. Here you can see I'm adding that tiny touch of pink into a few places on my leaves. And you could push this concept even further because I honestly think this is a really fun way to bring color harmony into your paintings. Finally, let's talk a little bit about weaving. In some of these areas, rather than finishing one leaf at a time, it worked really well to paint a little wet on the leaf, then transition back into the background, and then even glaze a little bit on the leaf beside it. That allowed me to knock down those gaps of light color that were kind of pulling a little bit too much attention to themselves. So I weave from leaf to background and into leaf again. This really helps bring cohesion between the leaves and the background. And even though I'm going to end up with some hard edges, those edges are going to be really subtle because these darker greens are weaving the painting together beautifully. Once that area where I weaved the color wet on wet has dried, I can come back in and add detail or even more color. In this case, I'm not really liking the way this leaf is looking, so once again, I pull the color into the background, soften the edge, and in a minute, you're going to see how I actually make the leaf in this section stand out just enough to show that it's there without attracting your eye too strongly to the bottom of the painting. A little scrubbing and glazing of color here helps to knock back that vein just a little, once again, because we don't want the viewer's eye to land down here. So I'm putting some details on this leaf, and then once everything's fully dry, I'm just coming into the background and making that background just a tiny little bit darker. And you can see that brings that little leaf forwards just enough. I'm going to do the same thing over here, and you're going to see how I create just that little hint of separation to show that that leaf is indeed separate from the background. You can see how I'm applying that same concept in these tiny little nooks and crannies, and that's also giving definition to these leaves because the background behind them is darker than the leaves are. I'd love to hear how these background tips have been helpful for you. If you'd like to follow along with my entire painting process for these apple blossoms, you can find a link to the full-length tutorial in my Etsy shop in the description below. The tutorial walks you step by step through each stage of the painting so that you can experience this process for yourself. This tutorial is a one-time purchase and you have lifetime access, and there's no monthly fee. And if you're on my free newsletter, you're welcome to email me at any time with questions or to get feedback on your work. I would love to see your finished painting. In the meantime, I hope today's tutorial has brought a little taste of God's beauty and peace into your everyday life, and that it's inspired you to continue enjoying your own creative journey. See you again soon. Bye!